Looking into the Duke of Ashbourne's eyes was rumoured to be like staring down a loaded pistol. He collected ruined lives like trophies. Yet, when Genevieve Sinclair was sold to him to settle a gambling debt, she refused to weep or beg. Instead, she struck a match and waited for the explosion. This is no fairy tale about a damsel in distress. It is the saga of the one woman who stared the devil in the face and commanded him to kneel. You are listening to the Duke's Defiance. Buckle up, because in this story, nothing is what it seems. The rain in London did not wash things clean. It merely made the grime slicker. It was a Tuesday in November, 1884, when Genevieve Sinclair stood by the frosted window of the drawing room in the Crestwood townhouse, watching the gas lamps flicker against the gloom of Grosvenor Square. The house was too quiet. The servants had been moving with the skittish urgency of frightened mice for 3 days. The silver candlesticks were gone from the mantel. The portrait of her mother, a Romney masterpiece that had hung above the fireplace for 20 years, had vanished overnight, leaving a pale, rectangular ghost on the wallpaper. Genevieve. Her father's voice was a cracked husk. She turned. Arthur Sinclair, the Earl of Crestwood, sat slumped in his leather wingback chair. He looked 20 years older than he had a month ago. His cravat was undone, a glass of amber brandy trembling in his hand. "Where is the silver, Papa?" Genevieve asked, her voice steady. She was 22, past the age of a debutante, and possessed a sharpness of mind that had frightened off 3 suitors. "And where is Mother's portrait?" "Gone," Arthur whispered. "All gone." "Gambling again?" She didn't shout. The anger had burned out years ago, leaving only a cold, hard ash in her chest. Lord Harrington? Or was it the races? Worse. Arthur took a shuddering breath. "I played at the Devil's Table, Evie, the private club on Street James Street, the one they say has no name." Genevieve froze. She knew the rumours. High stakes, dark rooms, men who wagered deeds to estates rather than sovereigns. "How much?" she asked. "Everything," he sobbed, the sound pathetic and wet. "The townhouse, the country estate in Derbyshire, the horses, the investments." "We are destitute then," Genevieve said, calculating rapidly. She could work as a governess. She spoke French and Italian fluently. "We shall leave London. Perhaps." "No." Arthur slammed his glass down, shattering it. "It is not just money, girl. I bet you." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Genevieve stared at him, unable to comprehend the words. "You bet me?" she repeated slowly. "Like a broodmare?" "I thought I had the hand," he wailed. "A full house, Evie." "I was sure. But he had 4 kings. He sat there, wearing that iron mask he never takes off, and he laid them down one by one." "Who?" Genevieve demanded, stepping forward. "Who holds my deed, father?" Arthur looked up, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "Silas Hawthorne," he whispered. "The Duke of Ashbourne." Genevieve felt a chill crawl up her spine. The Duke of Ashbourne, the Wolf of the North. He was not merely a peer, he was a predator. Rumours swirled around him like smoke. They said he had killed his first wife in a fit of rage. They said he controlled half the shipping lanes in Liverpool and had the Prime Minister in his pocket. He was a recluse, scarred and terrifying, who rarely came to London unless he intended to destroy someone. "He does not want a wife, Papa," Genevieve said, her voice trembling for the first time. "He wants a victim." "He wants an heir," Arthur said miserably, "and he wants the Crestwood bloodline to legitimize his own. He is coming tonight, Evie, to collect." "Tonight?" "Within the hour." Genevieve looked at the grandfather clock. It ticked relentlessly. She did not cry. She felt a strange sensation, a tightening in her chest that was not fear, but fury. Her father had sold her like cattle to a monster. "Very well," she said, smoothing the silk of her emerald dress. "Let him come." "Evie, you must be docile," Arthur pleaded, reaching for her hand. She pulled away sharply. "He is a violent man. Do not provoke him." "You sold me, father," she said coldly. "You have lost the right to give me advice." She turned back to the window. A black carriage, drawn by 4 massive Frisian horses, was turning into the square. It lacked a crest. It was simply a black box on wheels, ominous and inevitable. The carriage stopped. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, impossibly tall, wearing a long black greatcoat that swirled around his boots. He wore a top hat pulled low. Even from the second floor, Genevieve could feel the weight of his presence. He didn't look up. He simply walked toward the front door with the stride of a man who owned the earth beneath his feet. Genevieve lifted her chin. If she was to be sold to the devil, she would ensure he paid a high price for the acquisition. The library was dim, lit only by the low fire and a single oil lamp on the desk. Arthur Sinclair cowered in the corner, clutching a fresh glass of brandy. Genevieve stood in the center of the room. She refused to sit. The door opened, and the butler, Mr. Henderson, announced the guest with a voice that wavered. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne. Silas Hawthorne entered. Up close, he was terrifying. He was broader than any man Genevieve had ever met, filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing hair as black as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that was harsh, angular, and undeniably handsome, save for the scar. A jagged, pale line ran from his left temple, slicing through his eyebrow and down to his cheekbone. It didn't disfigure him so much as mark him, a warning label etched in skin. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray, cold, and assessing. They swept over the room, dismissing her father instantly, and landed on Genevieve. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. "Lady Genevieve," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like gravel grinding under a boot. "Your Grace," she replied, dipping into a curtsy that was technically perfect but mocking in its precision. She rose and met his gaze. "I understand I am the payment for a bad night at cards." Arthur let out a strangled squeak. "Genevieve, mind your tongue." Silas Hawthorne's eyes narrowed slightly. He walked further into the room, the heavy thud of his boots echoing on the hardwood. He stopped 2 feet from her. He smelled of rain, tobacco, and cold steel. "You are blunt," Silas said. "I am practical," she countered. "My father says I am to marry you. Monday next," Silas said. "We will marry by special license at St. George's. Then you will accompany me to Blackwood Hall in Yorkshire. And if I refuse?" Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the desk. "Then your father goes to Newgate prison for fraud. He wagered assets he did not possess before he wagered you. That is a crime against the crown." Genevieve glanced at her father, who was weeping silently now. Disgust curled in her stomach. "I see," she said. "So it is not a marriage. It is a hostage situation. Call it what you like," Silas said indifferently. "You will have the title of Duchess. You will have an allowance of £5,000 a year. You will have the run of the estate." "And what do you get?" she asked. Silas stepped closer. He towered over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her chin. She didn't flinch, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I get silence," he said softly. "I require a wife who is presentable, well-bred, and capable of managing a household that has complexities. And I require a son." Genevieve felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her ground. "And the rumors? That you killed your first wife?" Arthur gasped. "Genevieve." Silas went still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at her, and for a second she saw something flash in those grey eyes. Pain? Rage? It was gone too fast to be sure. "My first wife," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "died of a fever. If you listen to gossip, Genevieve, you will not survive a week at Blackwood Hall. Is that a threat?" "It is advice." He turned away from her, dismissing her as easily as he had entered. "Pack your things. You may bring one maid, provided she is not a chatterbox. The carriage will collect you at 10 on Monday." He walked to the desk, signed the paper, and looked at Arthur. "Your debt is cleared, Crestwood. Never cross my path again." With that, he strode out. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, rattling the windows. Genevieve stood alone in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the paper on the desk. It was a bill of sale, signed in bold, slashing ink. Silas Hawthorne. She walked over and picked it up. Her hands shook, but not from fear. "He thinks he has bought a broodmare," she whispered to the empty room. "He is about to find out he has married a wolf." The journey to Yorkshire took 3 days of grueling travel. The further north they went, the wilder the land became. The polite, manicured hedgerows of the south gave way to craggy moors and wind-swept hills that looked like the spine of some sleeping beast. Silas rode in the carriage with her, but he barely spoke. He spent the hours reading correspondence or staring out the window, his profile etched in stone. He was a man of immense control. He didn't fidget. He didn't make small talk. Genevieve, refusing to be cowed by his silence, read her book a copy of Jane Eyre and occasionally ate the cold pheasant packed for their lunch. "You read novels?" Silas observed on the second day, not looking away from the window. "Is that forbidden by the Duke?" she asked archly. He turned to look at her. "I have no interest in forbidding things, Genevieve. I only wonder why you fill your head with fantasies when your reality is about to become difficult. Perhaps I am looking for tips on how to handle brooding masters of dark estates," she said. A corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. Rochester was a fool. He let his secrets control him. "And you," she challenged. "Do you control your secrets, Your Grace?" He leaned forward, the leather of the seat creaking. "My secrets are not in the attic, Genevieve. They are everywhere. And you would do well to remember that curiosity killed more than just the cat." The carriage lurched as they turned off the main road. Ahead, looming out of the mist, was Blackwood Hall. It was a fortress. Built of dark grey stone, it sat on a cliff, overlooking a churning, violent sea. Towers pierced the sky like spears. It looked cold, impenetrable, and utterly lonely. As they pulled into the courtyard, Genevieve saw a line of servants waiting in the drizzle. They looked terrified. The carriage door opened. Silas stepped out and offered his hand. For the first time, skin touched skin as she took it. His hand was large, rough, and surprisingly warm. He gripped her fingers firmly, pulling her down. "Welcome home, Duchess," he said. The title sounded like a curse. They entered the great hall. It was cavernous, hung with faded tapestries and suits of armor that looked ready to march. A severe-looking woman in black bombazine stepped forward. "Mrs. Halloway," Silas said. "This is the Duchess. Show her to the East Wing. She is tired." "The East Wing, Your Grace?" Mrs. Halloway asked, her eyes widening. "But the draft, and it is so near. The East Wing," Silas repeated, his voice brooking no argument. Mrs. Halloway bobbed a curtsy. "Yes, Your Grace. This way, my lady." Genevieve looked at her new husband. "You are not joining me?" "I have work," Silas said, already turning toward a heavy oak door on the far side of the hall. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." Genevieve followed Mrs. Halloway up the winding stone staircase. The corridors were cold, the stone walls weeping with damp. "Mrs. Halloway," Genevieve asked as they walked down a long, dimly lit hallway, "why were you surprised he put me in the East Wing?" The housekeeper hesitated, clutching her keys. "It is nothing, my lady. It has been closed for many years. Since the first Duchess passed." "I see." Genevieve paused. "How did she die, Mrs. Halloway? Truly?" Mrs. Halloway stopped. She looked left and right, ensuring they were alone. She leaned in close, her voice a frightened whisper. "She didn't die of a fever, my lady. She was found on the cliffs below the house. They say she jumped, or was pushed." "Pushed?" Genevieve felt a cold knot in her stomach. "By whom?" Mrs. Halloway pulled back, her face pale. "I have said too much. Please, my lady. The Duke, he hears everything." She hurried away, leaving Genevieve standing alone in the dark corridor. Genevieve entered her room. It was magnificent, but freezing. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in heavy velvet. But what caught her eye was the window. It looked out over the cliffs, and there, standing on the edge of the precipice in the pouring rain, was a figure. Genevieve squinted. It was Silas. He was standing dangerously close to the edge, staring down into the violent surf. He stood there for a long time, unmoving, like a statue erected to mourn the dead. Then he turned and looked up, straight at her window. Even from this distance, Genevieve felt the impact of his gaze. He knew she was watching. She stepped back, drawing the curtain. Her heart was racing. She wasn't just in a loveless marriage. She was in a mystery, and if she wasn't careful, she would be the next ghost haunting the corridors of Blackwood Hall. November bled into December, bringing with it a biting frost that coated the windows of Blackwood Hall in intricate, icy patterns. Life in the castle was a strange, silent dance. Genevieve rarely saw Silas during the day. He was always out on the moors, inspecting the mines he owned, or locked in his study with men who looked more like thugs than solicitors. But at night, they dined together. These dinners were battles of wit. Genevieve refused to be the silent, trembling wife. She questioned him about politics, about the shipping strikes in Liverpool, about the management of the estate. At first, Silas seemed annoyed. Then, he seemed amused. Finally, he began to engage. She discovered that the monster of the North was brilliantly, terrifyingly intelligent. He spoke of industrial reform and the corruption of the House of Lords with a cynicism that matched her own. But whenever she steered the conversation toward his past, or his first wife, Clara, the iron gate slammed shut. "The past is a country we do not visit, Genevieve," he would say, pouring another glass of dark red wine. "The natives are hostile." But Genevieve was not one to heed warnings. One Tuesday afternoon, while Silas was away in York, Genevieve entered the library. She had noticed that Mrs. Halloway always cleaned this room herself, never letting the maids touch the Duke's private desk. Genevieve moved to the massive mahogany desk. She wasn't stealing, she was surviving. She needed to know who she had married. She tugged at the drawers. Locked. She pulled a hairpin from her chignon. It was a trick her cousin, a locksmith's son, had taught her years ago during a boring summer in Kent. It took 5 minutes of fiddling before the lock clicked. The drawer slid open. Inside, there were no scandals, no love letters. There was a pistol, a heavy, Webley revolver, and a ledger. She opened the ledger. It wasn't accounting. It was a list of names. Lord Harrington, Viscount Stirling, Mr. Thomas Strickland. Next to each name were dates and sums of money. And next to some, a single word, written in red ink, silenced. Genevieve's breath hitched. Was this a hit list? Was her husband a murderer for hire? "I wouldn't read that if I were you." Genevieve spun around, dropping the ledger. Standing in the doorway was not Silas, but a man she hadn't met. He was slight, with sandy hair and a smile that didn't reach his watery blue eyes. He wore a suit that was too expensive for a servant, but too flashy for a gentleman. "Who are you?" Genevieve demanded, stepping in front of the open drawer to hide the gun. "Thomas Strickland," the man said, bowing low. "The family solicitor. I let myself in." The butler was indisposed. Genevieve felt a prickle of danger on the back of her neck. Thomas Strickland. His name was in the book. "The Duke is not here, Mr. Strickland." "I know," Strickland said, walking further into the room. "I came to see you, Duchess. I wanted to offer my condolences." "I am not in mourning," she said sharply. "Aren't you?" He stopped a few feet away, glancing at the ledger on the floor. "Married to the beast of Blackwood? It is a kind of death, isn't it?" Poor Clara thought so. "You knew her?" "Intimately," Strickland smirked. "She was a flighty thing, scared of her own shadow, especially scared of him. She told me things, you know, before she fell." "What things?" Genevieve stepped forward. Strickland lowered his voice. "She found out where the money came from, Genevieve. The Duke doesn't just own mines. He owns secrets. He blackmails half the House of Lords. That's how he keeps his power." Clara was going to expose him. And then, poof, gravity took its course. Genevieve's mind raced. It fit, the ledger, the silenced notes. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because you are the new liability," Strickland said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "He needs an heir. Once you give him a son, do you think he'll need you? You're just an incubator, my dear. And once the job is done, you'll find the cliffs are just as slippery for a second wife as they were for the first." He reached out and touched a lock of her hair. Genevieve recoiled. "Get out," she ordered, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house." Strickland laughed. "I'll go. But when you realize the monster is sharpening his knife, come find me at the village inn. I can get you out, Genevieve. For a price." He turned and left. Genevieve stood trembling. She looked down at the ledger, silenced. Was Silas a monster, or was Strickland a liar? That night, the storm hit. The wind howled around the towers of Blackwood Hall like a banshee. Silas returned late, soaked to the bone, his mood foul. They ate in silence. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Genevieve couldn't take it. "Thomas Strickland was here today," she said. "Silas Froze." His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. Slowly, he lowered it. The look he gave her was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "What did he say to you?" Silas asked, his voice low. "He told me about Clara," Genevieve said, gripping the edge of the table. "He told me you blackmailed the lords. He told me you killed her because she found out." Silas stood up so abruptly his chair crashed backward onto the floor. "He was in this house?" Silas roared. "Near you?" "Yes. He warned me that I was next." Genevieve stood too, shouting back. "Is it true, Silas? Is that list in your desk a list of men you've destroyed? You broke into my desk? I am your wife. I have a right to know if I am sleeping in the bed of a murderer." Silas stared at her, his chest heaving. The scar on his face turned a violent white against his flushed skin. "You have no idea what you have done," he whispered. "You think I am the monster? You think I am the danger?" He walked around the table, closing the distance between them. Genevieve flinched, expecting a blow. Silas saw the flinch. He stopped dead. A look of profound hurt crossed his face, shattering the mask of the Duke. "You are terrified of me," he said softly. "Shouldn't I be?" she cried, tears finally spilling over. "Everyone says you killed her." "I didn't kill her," Silas shouted, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "I was trying to save her. Strickland isn't a solicitor, Genevieve. He's a fixer for the syndicate, a criminal ring operating out of London. They use the mines to move contraband. I spent 5 years trying to root them out. Clara didn't find out about my crimes. She was working for them." Genevieve gasped. "What?" "She wasn't a victim," Silas said, his voice breaking. "She was a spy. Strickland sent her to find my evidence against them. When she couldn't find it, she tried to leave them. They threw her off that cliff to send a message to me." He reached out, grabbing Genevieve's shoulders. His grip was hard, desperate. "Why do you think I bought you?" he hissed. "Why do you think I demanded a wife from a destitute earl who had no connections to the syndicate? Because I needed someone they couldn't turn, someone who had nothing to do with their world. You were protecting me?" "I have guards on every door," Silas said intensely. "I check the food for poison myself. I stand on the cliffs every night to make sure no boats land in the cove below. I have lived in hell for 3 years, trying to dismantle them before they kill me. And now Strickland has made contact with you." He let her go and ran a hand through his wet hair. "He wasn't warning you, Genevieve," Silas said grimly. "He was marking you. He knows you are my weakness." Genevieve stared at him. The pieces clicked into place. The isolation, the pistol, the ledger. It wasn't a hit list. It was evidence. "Your weakness?" she repeated softly. Silas looked at her. The storm raged outside, but in the room, the silence was heavy with a new, fragile understanding. "Yes," he admitted, his grey eyes burning into hers, "because despite my best efforts to treat you like a business arrangement, I find myself unable to look away when you walk into a room." Genevieve's heart hammered. "Silas, go to your room," he commanded, his voice turning steel hard again. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Strickland has made his move. Tonight, I have to make mine." "Where are you going?" She grabbed his arm. "To finish what I started 3 years ago," he said. He pulled a small dagger from his boot and pressed it into her hand. "If anyone enters your room who is not me, use this. Do not hesitate. Aim for the throat." He turned and strode out into the storm, leaving Genevieve standing in the candlelight, the cold steel of the dagger pressing against her palm, and the realization that the villain of her story was actually the only thing standing between her and death. Genevieve did not lock herself in her room as ordered. The moment Silas disappeared into the black maw of the storm, the reality of her position settled over her like a heavy shroud. She was alone in a castle that felt less like a home and more like a tomb, armed with a dagger that felt comically small in her hand. She paced the floor, the sound of the rain lashing against the stone acting as a metronome for her anxiety. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounded like a scream. He went to finish it, she thought. But what if they finish him? A crash from downstairs shattered her thoughts. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct, brittle sound of glass exploding. Genevieve froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She gripped the dagger tighter, her knuckles turning white. She blew out the candle in her room, plunging the space into darkness. If they were coming, she wouldn't give them a beacon. She opened her door a crack. The corridor was pitch black, but she could hear voices drifting up from the great hall. They were not the hushed tones of servants. They were rough, loud, and confident. "Find the girl," a voice commanded. It was Strickland. "And burn the ledger. If the Duke returns, put a bullet in his knee. I want him alive to watch." Genevieve's blood ran cold. Silas hadn't intercepted them. They had slipped past him, or worse, they had already dealt with him. She couldn't stay here. The bedroom was a dead end. If they cornered her, she was finished. She needed to move. She slipped into the hallway, her velvet slippers silent on the stone. She knew the layout of the east wing better than they did. She headed for the servants' stairs, intending to reach the kitchens and flee out the back. As she rounded the corner near the gallery, a hand clamped over her mouth. Genevieve thrusted the dagger backward with all her might. The blade was caught in mid-air by a gloved hand. A strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her into an alcove behind a tapestry. "Easy, Duchess," a rough voice whispered in her ear. "It's me." She stopped struggling. The scent of rain and tobacco was unmistakable. Silas. He spun her around. He was alive, but he looked like he had been through a war. His coat was torn, his hair plastered to his skull, and blood was seeping through the white linen of his shirt at the shoulder. "You're hurt," she whispered, her hand hovering over the wound. "A scratch," he dismissed, though his face was pale. "I underestimated Strickland. He brought mercenaries. There are 20 men in the house." 20, Genevieve gasped. "Silas, we have to leave." "We can't," he said grimly. "They've surrounded the perimeter. They have men at the stables and the gates. We are trapped." "Then what do we do?" Silas looked down at her. In the gloom, his grey eyes were fierce. "We fight. But not here. We need to get to the strong room in the cellar. I have weapons there. Can you run?" "Yes. Stay behind me. If I fall, you don't stop. You understand? You run." "I am not leaving you," she hissed. "Genevieve, move, Silas." He didn't argue. He took her hand, and they ran. They moved like shadows. They reached the top of the grand staircase just as 3 men started climbing it. "There," one shouted, raising a pistol. Silas didn't hesitate. He raised his own Webley revolver and fired twice. 2 men dropped, tumbling down the stairs. The third scrambled for cover. The deafening boom of the shots echoed through the hall. "Go!" Silas roared, pushing her toward the back stairs. They sprinted down the narrow servants' passage. Bullets splintered the wood paneling around them. Genevieve could hear the shouts of men closing in. They burst into the kitchen. It was empty. The staff had likely fled or been rounded up. Silas shoved a heavy oak table against the door they had just come through. "The cellar," he panted, pointing to a heavy iron door near the pantry. They scrambled inside, Silas slamming the bolt home, just as bodies slammed against the other side. They descended into the dark. The air grew colder, smelling of earth and damp. Silas led her through a maze of wine racks until they reached a section of the wall that looked solid. He pressed a hidden brick. The wall groaned and swung open. Inside was a small, stone room. It was stark a cot, a crate of ammunition, several rifles, and a medical kit. Silas slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was taking over. "Silas!" Genevieve dropped to her knees beside him. The blood on his shoulder was spreading fast. "I'm fine," he gritted out, his eyes closing. "You are a terrible liar," she said, her voice trembling. She ripped the hem of her petticoat. "I need to stop the bleeding. This is going to hurt. Do it." She pressed the cloth against the wound. Silas let out a guttural groan, his hand gripping her wrist so hard it bruised. But he didn't pull away. Genevieve worked quickly, binding the wound tight. Her hands were covered in his blood. The reality of the violence washed over her, but she shoved it down. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. "Why are they doing this?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just for money?" Silas opened his eyes. They were hazy but focused on her. "Power," he whispered. "The syndicate wants to use Blackwood as a port for opium coming from the east." I refused. "Strickland. He wants to make an example of me. He wants to show the North that no one defies them." He reached up, his bloody hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I am sorry, Genevieve," he said softly. "I dragged you into hell." "You didn't drag me," she said fiercely, covering his hand with hers. "My father sold me. You are the only one who has tried to save me." "I should have sent you away," he murmured. "The moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't keep you safe. You were too bright, too alive for this mausoleum." "Why did you buy me, Silas?" she asked, the question that had plagued her for weeks. "Truly?" He looked at her, his defenses stripped away by pain and exhaustion. "Because I saw you at the opera 3 years ago," he confessed. "Before the debt, before Clara died. You were arguing with a viscount who had insulted your sister. You looked like a queen, fearless. When your father put you on the table, I couldn't let Strickland take you. He was the other bidder, Genevieve. If I hadn't won that hand, you would belong to him." Genevieve stared at him. The horror of what he said settled in. Strickland, the man who had threatened her, who had murdered Clara, had wanted her. Silas hadn't bought her to use her. He had bought her to keep her out of a monster's hands. She leaned down, her forehead resting against his. "We are going to survive this," she whispered. "And then, Your Grace, you are going to explain why it took a siege for you to tell me that." Silas let out a weak, raspy laugh. "It's a deal." Above them, a muffled boom shook the ceiling. Dust rained down. "They are blowing the door," Silas said, struggling to sit up. "They know we're here." "Let them come," Genevieve said, reaching for one of the rifles on the rack. She checked the chamber with a proficiency that surprised him. "My father taught me to shoot grouse in Derbyshire. I imagine a man is a larger target." Silas looked at his wife, blood on her dress, a rifle in her hands, and fire in her eyes. He had never seen anything more beautiful. "Pass the grouse," he said, checking his revolver. "Let's introduce Mr. Strickland to the Sinclair temper." The heavy iron door of the strong room shuddered under the impact of a sledgehammer. Clang, clang. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Silas was on his feet, fueled by sheer will. He positioned himself behind a stack of crates, leveling his revolver at the door. Genevieve knelt beside him, the heavy Winchester rifle resting on a barrel. "There are 6 rounds in the revolver," Silas said calmly. "Save the rifle for long range if we break out. Aim for the center mass." "I know," she said, her voice steady. The hinges screamed. With one final thunderous crash, the door flew inward. Smoke and dust billowed into the room. 2 men rushed in, pistols drawn. Bang, bang. Silas fired twice. Both men dropped before they could even see their targets. "Hold fire," Strickland's voice echoed from the corridor. "Don't run in there, you idiots. Smoke them out." A canister hissed across the floor, spewing thick, acrid yellow smoke. "Mustard gas," Silas coughed, grabbing a wet rag from the medical kit and pressing it to Genevieve's face. "We can't stay here. The ventilation is poor. We'll suffocate." "The tunnel," Genevieve choked out into the rag. "Does it go to the cliffs?" "It goes to the old smugglers' caves," Silas said. "But the tide is high. It might be flooded." "Better to drown than to burn," she said, eyes watering. Silas nodded. He kicked open a grate in the floor, revealing a dark, vertical shaft with a rusted ladder. "Go. I'll cover the descent." Genevieve scrambled down the ladder into the abyss. Silas fired 2 suppression shots into the smoke and followed, pulling the heavy grate shut above him. They descended into the bowels of the earth. The air here was salt-heavy and cold. They reached the bottom, standing in ankle-deep water in a natural cavern. The sound of the ocean was a roar now, echoing off the wet walls. "This way," Silas led her, wading through the freezing water. They moved for what felt like miles. The water rose to their waists. Silas was flagging. His movements were jerky, his breathing ragged. The blood loss was taking its toll. "Silas," Genevieve said, grabbing his arm to steady him. "We have to stop. You're burning up." "If we stop, we die," he slurred. Suddenly, lights flickered ahead. Lanterns. "They cut us off," Silas realized, halting. Strickland knew about the caves. They were trapped between the rising tide and the mercenaries ahead. Silas looked around desperately. They were in a large cavern supported by old rotting timber beams. It was part of the abandoned mine workings that intersected the natural caves. A look of dark resolve crossed his face. He looked at the support beams, then at Genevieve. "Genevieve," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Do you trust me?" "Yes. Run to that alcove over there." He pointed to a small cleft in the rock, higher up, away from the water. "Cover your ears and open your mouth. Do not move until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to bring the house down," he said. He pulled a stick of dynamite from his coat pocket, something he had grabbed from the strong room. "Silas, no, you'll be buried. I know the structural points. I can collapse the tunnel entrance without bringing down the whole cavern. It will seal us in, but it will keep them out. Go." He shoved her toward the alcove. Genevieve scrambled up the slippery rocks. She turned to see Silas lighting the fuse. "Hey, Strickland!" Silas roared. stepping out into the open, the lit dynamite in his hand. The mercenaries ahead raised their lanterns. Strickland was there, looking smug. "End of the line, Your Grace." "I agree," Silas smiled. It was a wolf's smile. He threw the dynamite at the timber supports holding up the tunnel roof between them. "Run!" Strickland screamed. Boom! The explosion was earth-shattering. The shockwave knocked Genevieve flat against the rock. The world turned to dust and thunder. Massive boulders crashed down, sealing the tunnel with a roar that drowned out the ocean. Then, silence. Dust swirled in the darkness. "Silas?" Genevieve whispered, her ears ringing. "Silas?" She scrambled down from the alcove, coughing. "Silas!" She found him half submerged in the water, a beam of wood pinning his leg. He was unconscious. "No, no, no," she sobbed, wading over. She pushed against the beam. It was heavy, waterlogged oak. She gritted her teeth and shoved with every ounce of strength she possessed. The adrenaline of terror gave her power she didn't know she had. The beam shifted just an inch. "Wake up, damn you!" she screamed at him. Silas groaned. His eyes fluttered open. He coughed water. Did I get them?" he rasped. "You lunatic," she cried, half laughing, half sobbing. "You collapsed the mountain. Help me push." Together, they heaved the beam off his leg. Silas cried out in pain, but his leg wasn't broken, only badly bruised. They dragged themselves out of the water onto a dry ledge of rock. They were sealed, in a tomb of stone, with the ocean rising below them. "We're alive," Silas breathed, leaning his head back against the rock. He reached out and found her hand in the dark. "We are trapped," Genevieve corrected him, squeezing his hand. "Not quite," Silas said. "The tide will turn in an hour. There is a sea vent in the ceiling of this cavern. When the water drops, we can climb out." He turned his head to look at her. In the dim light reflecting from the phosphorescent algae in the water, his face was unguarded. "You saved me," he said. "Back there with the beam." "I am protecting my investment," she joked weakly. "I haven't spent my £5,000 allowance yet." Silas didn't smile. He pulled her closer. His hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her damp hair. "I have spent my life making people fear me," he whispered. "I thought it was the only way to be safe. But you defied me at every turn, and it is the only thing that has kept me alive." "I don't fear you, Silas," she whispered back. "I never did." "I know," he said. "And that terrifies me more than Strickland ever could." He leaned in. His lips met hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, tasting of salt, blood, and survival. It was an oath sealed not in ink, but in breath and shared danger. For the first time, Silas Hawthorne lost all control. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a disintegrating world. When they broke apart, breathless, the air between them had changed. They were no longer the Duke and the unwanted bride. They were partners. "When we get out of here," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous, "I am going to destroy Strickland. I will take apart his life, brick by brick. No one touches what is mine." Genevieve looked at the scar on his face, now covered in dust. She traced the line of it with her thumb. "No," she said softly. "We will destroy him. Together." Silas kissed her palm. "Together." As the tide began to recede, revealing the jagged path to freedom, the Duke of Ashbourne and his Duchess prepared to rise from the grave. The syndicate believed them dead. They were about to learn that ghosts are far more dangerous than the living. London wore mourning black, but Thomas Strickland wore a smile he could barely conceal. It was 2 weeks after the tragic accident at Blackwood Hall. The official story, painstakingly crafted by Strickland and the syndicate, was that a gas leak in the mines had caused a catastrophic explosion, burying the Duke and his new bride under tons of rock. St. George's, Hanover Square was packed. The pews were filled with the very peers Silas had blackmailed, men who were secretly relieved the Wolf of the North was dead. In the front row sat Arthur Sinclair, weeping into a handkerchief, playing the part of the grieving father to perfection. Strickland stood at the pulpit. He adjusted his silk lapels, looking out at the sea of faces. "We gather today," Strickland began, his voice smooth as oil, "to mourn a man of great power and a woman of great beauty, taken too soon. The estate, of course, falls into receivership, but rest assured, I shall manage the transition with the utmost care." Bum! The heavy double doors of the church slammed open. The sound was like a cannon shot. The organist stopped playing. Every head turned. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the winter sun, were two figures. Silas Hawthorne stood tall, dressed not in mourning, but in a severe, impeccable charcoal suit. His arm was in a sling, and the scar on his face seemed to glow with a terrible intensity. Beside him stood Genevieve. She wore deep emerald green, the color of the dress she had worn the night she was sold. She looked regal, fierce, and very much alive. "I believe," Silas's voice boomed through the silent church, "that you are sitting in my pew, Mr. Strickland." Strickland gripped the pulpit, his face draining of blood. A ghost." "No ghost," Genevieve said, her voice ringing clear as a bell. She walked down the aisle, Silas matching her stride. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, though you certainly tried your best to make us so. "This is impossible," Strickland stammered, looking for his hired men, who were nowhere to be found. "The mine, the explosion." "We climbed out," Silas said, stopping at the foot of the altar. He turned to face the congregation. His grey eyes swept over the lords who had feared him for years. "And we brought something with us." Silas reached into his coat with his good hand and pulled out the ledger. It was water-stained and battered, but the red ink was still legible. "The Syndicate," Silas announced, holding the book aloft. "A criminal ring of smuggling, extortion, and murder, orchestrated by Thomas Strickland and funded by several men sitting in this very room." Panic rippled through the pews. Men began to stand up, shouting protests. "Lies!" Strickland shrieked. "He is mad! Seize him!" "I wouldn't," a new voice cut in. From the vestry, Inspector Aberline of Scotland Yard stepped out, flanked by 6 uniformed constables. "We received the Duchess's telegram 3 days ago," Aberline said, tipping his hat to Genevieve. "And we have spent the last 48 hours verifying the contents of that ledger. Mr. Strickland, you are under arrest for the murder of Clara Hawthorne and the attempted murder of the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne." Strickland bolted. He scrambled over the altar rail, heading for the back exit. "Silas!" Genevieve shouted. Silas didn't run. He simply picked up a heavy brass candlestick from the altar and hurled it with terrifying precision. It struck Strickland in the back of the knees. The fixer crumpled to the stone floor with a howl of pain. The constables swarmed him, dragging him away in irons. As he was hauled past the Duke, Strickland spat at him. "You'll never be free of us, Hawthorne. You're a monster." Silas leaned in close, his voice a low growl only Strickland could hear. "I am not a monster. I am a husband protecting his wife, and that is far more dangerous." As the police cleared the church, Arthur Sinclair approached them. He looked hopeful, his eyes wet. "Evie! Oh, thank God! I thought I had lost you." He reached out to embrace her. Genevieve stepped back, her expression cold. "You lost me the night you bet me on a hand of cards, father," she said softly. "But I am your father," Arthur pleaded, looking at Silas nervously. "Surely now that you are safe." "I am safe because of him," she said, taking Silas's hand. "Not you. You sold me to pay a debt. Consider the transaction complete. Do not contact us again." Arthur stood frozen as Genevieve turned her back on him. She looked up at Silas. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them both exhausted but triumphant. The society that had shunned them, the father who had sold them, the villain who had hunted them, it was all over. "Let's go home," Silas said gently. 3 months later, the spring sun finally broke the winter's hold on Yorkshire. The purple heather on the moors was blooming, painting the rugged landscape in soft hues. Blackwood Hall was no longer a tomb. The heavy drapes had been pulled back, letting light flood the dusty corridors. The servants no longer walked in fear. They whistled as they worked. On the terrace overlooking the sea, Silas sat in a wicker chair, reading a newspaper. The headline read, "Strickland hanged at Newgate. The end of the syndicate." He folded the paper and set it aside. He looked out at the cliffs, the same cliffs that had once haunted his nightmares. Genevieve walked out onto the terrace. She was carrying a tray with tea, her steps light. She placed it on the table and sat on the arm of his chair. "The news from London?" she asked. "It is finished," Silas said. He took her hand, kissing her knuckles. The scar on his face had faded slightly, but more importantly, the tension that had defined his features for years was gone. The wolf of the north had finally found peace. "And us?" Genevieve asked, running a hand through his dark hair. "Are we finished with adventures?" Silas pulled her into his lap, ignoring the tea. He looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman who had defied him, fought for him, and saved his soul. "I suspect," Silas smiled, "that our adventure is just beginning." He kissed her, deep and slow, as the sun set over the sea, casting long golden shadows over a house that was finally, truly, a home. And that is the story of Silas and Genevieve, a love forged in betrayal, tested by fire, and sealed in blood. It reminds us that sometimes the people we are taught to fear are the only ones who can truly save us, and that even the darkest hearts can be healed by a defiant spirit. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. What was your favorite moment? Was it the poker game, the cave explosion, or Genevieve telling her father off at the end? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale of romance, mystery, and revenge. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your secrets close.